Hello, Vancouver. Welcome. Just another few seconds. We started a little bit early, so I think people will still be coming into the Zoom. We want to give everyone a chance to be here from the beginning, but we'll start very shortly. Hey, Oakland, happy to have you. Catherine says hello to the wonderful Linda. The very wonderful Linda Tai. Welcome, everyone, as you're settling in. We're just giving a couple moments to let everyone come in and get ready, get settled. Boston, Connecticut, Houston, welcome in. Happy to have you. Northern California, beautiful. Ontario, beautiful. Welcome in. Happy to have you. We're broadcasting to YouTube. Hello, Maine. Hello, Queens. Pat, we're ready to get started. Welcome to TRF Tuesday. This is the Trauma Research Foundation's weekly mini workshop series from bright and diverse voices in therapeutic embodiment. YouTube viewers, please subscribe. It tells YouTube that this content is valuable and they'll show it to more people. We're so happy to have you all with us for Trauma 101. Today's session is called Finding, an adaptive evolutionary strategy turned haywire with the threat of traumatic stress. Please drop any questions you have in the chat. We'll have a little time at the end for Q&A. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce to you the wonderful Linda Tai. Linda is a trauma therapist who specializes in cutting-edge brain and body-based modalities for the healing of complex developmental trauma. As an educator and consultant, she is gifted with the capacity to contextualize, synthesize, and communicate complex and nuanced issues pertaining to the impact of oppressive systems upon identity, mental health, and well-being, and the invisibilized wounds of racial trauma. Linda is passionate about breaking the cycle of historical and intergenerational trauma at the individual and community levels, and deeply believes in the healing power of coming together in community to grieve. Born in Vietnam, raised in Australia, and now living in Alaska, Linda is a former child refugee who is not only redefining what it means to be Vietnamese or Australian or to be United Statesian, she is redefining what it means to be wounded and whole and a healer. Thank you for being here, Linda. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Mary. And thank you for everyone being here in community with us together today. So as I've been starting these sessions, we've been preparing the brain for learning through engaging through the body. So some of you may have noticed that I've been swaying from side to side. And so if you like, you may wish to join me, swaying from side to side. And you can do this seated or you can do this standing. When the vestibular system is engaged, that's the balance systems of the brain, then the limbic brain, the emotionally survival-oriented part of the brain, is offline. And so some of you may find yourself rocking from side to side. I'm standing up, so what I'm actually doing is lifting one heel at a time and just allowing my body weight to gently shift from side to side. And this is something that I regularly do for myself as a participant in day-long workshops, half-day workshops, conferences, retreats, where my brain is starting to get tired and my tendency is then to go into hyperdrive, hyper-focus, concentrate. And that takes a lot of strain on behalf of my brain. I then get tension, headaches. I start clenching through the jaw. And I've since discovered I can just stand at the back of the room and allow myself to lift one heel, lift the other heel. And then being towards the back of the room, I've got a longer focal length distance. And that also helps me to be able to see the bigger picture rather than hyper-focusing on something that's, close to me, which can contribute towards the brain strain. If you like, you may wish to experiment with lifting both heels up at the same time and then lowering, perhaps rocking back, just noticing what that's like for you. And you may perhaps wish to play with proximity to the screen, right? To maybe take a few steps back and notice what that's like for you, to have a little bit more distance. If you like, I invite you to find your center. And then if you like, we're going to move our arms. And for some of this, both arms will be doing the same thing. And then there'll be times when each arm is doing something different to the other arm. And what that does is it makes the left and the right hemisphere of the brain talk to each other. And so in the world of yoga, it's known as contralateral movement. So if you like, you can bring your arms up to a T and then lower your arms. If you like, you can bring your arms up to a T and right arm continues straight up. And then lowering right arm, lowering both arms. Bring your arms up to a T, left arm continues up. Lower the left arm down, lower both arms. Both arms reach all the way up. Perhaps you look up, perhaps not. And then lower down. So practice makes progress. It's about progress, not perfection. Arms to a T and lower down. Arms to a T, right arm continues up. Right arm lowers down, both arms down. Arms to a T, left arm continues straight up. Left arm down, both arms down. And then both arms reach up. Perhaps look up, perhaps not. And then perhaps the breath happens with the inhale, arms to a T, and perhaps an exhale, both arms down, perhaps not. Arms to a T, right arm continues up. Right arm down, both arms down. Arms to a T, left arm continues up. Left arm down, both arms down. Both arms reach up. And then both arms down. Include the heel lift if you like. Lift heels, arms to a T. Oh, you lost me. And then heels down, both arms down. Inhale or not, heels lift, arms to a T, right arm continues up. And then lower right arm, lower heels, lower arms. Lifting heels, arms to a T, left arm continues up. Left arm down, lower arms, lower heels. And then both heels, both arms reach all the way up. And then lower heels, lower arms. And practice makes progress. Lift heels, arms to a T. Lower arms, lower heels. Lift heels, arms to a T. Right arm continues up. Lower and lower and lower. Lift heels, both arms to a T. Left arm continues up. Lower the left arm, lower both arms, lower heels. Lift heels, arms reach all the way up. And then lower arms, lower heels. Take a pause here. Allow your body to integrate perhaps some of this movement. My body is continuing with the rocking. It's okay, whatever your body is doing right now. Now, I shared the practice with you in such a way that for some of us, it might have been a little bit too much too fast. And I just want to acknowledge that. This is something you can move towards. So you can start seated with just the arms. Yeah. And then come up to standing and do standing with just the arms. And then over time, perhaps lifting one heel at a time, or perhaps lifting both heels. Yeah. So just pausing, landing, perhaps a breath, perhaps a sound. Anything else your body would like from you in this moment. And then, as we've done in previous classes together, I'm going to invite you to have a look for your exits and the route between you and your exits, to have a look out the window or your imaginary window towards the horizon or the imaginary horizon, to have a look all the way behind you. Coming back through center and twisting the torso in the other direction. And then back to center. Notice the space above you and in front of you and below you. And then as you're ready, let's have a seat together. It feels so nice when my brain is prepared for learning. So today we will look at the find response, an adaptive evolutionary strategy turned haywire with the threat of traumatic stress. So we'll unpack this together. So here, we have the model that we've looked at the past couple of weeks. And so what happens for an infant, right, a toddler, when they're adequately and consistently responded to, they develop the capacity to have some bandwidth before their attachment cry comes up. So a baby who's adequately responded to, by the time they become toddlers, young children, they develop some bandwidth, to be able to hold the activation that happens in the nervous system and then have other options before that attachment cry comes up. And so some of these other options, when an alerting response happens, is that that small child can then orient to the environment. Is there, what is going on around me? They can adaptively engage in finding, seeking out a caregiver, seeking out an appropriate adult, seeking out or asking for what they need. And they also have the capacity to sit with the activation of that, and they might exhibit some of that tension through fidgeting. Through fidgeting. And so they have more resources available to them before they cry out for help as a survival imperative. However, for some of us, there wasn't anyone there for us. So we might perhaps get stuck here in this alerting response. And we're going to focus today on the find response. And so last week, we looked at a more holistic approach to conceptualizing traumatic stress. And so today I'd like to focus in on this too sudden, too much, or too little of something. What is this something? And so if we look into the research in regards to what causes stress, lack of information or too much information, or information that has no resolution, so open information loops, a lack of transparency or trust, a lack of predictability or certainty, the loss of agency, voice, choice, and control, conflict that a person is unable to handle, which then can result in the loss of dignity. And when we combine that with isolation from emotionally supportive relationships, then we have a continuum of stress that we may or may not have adequate time, space, permission, protection, resources, or resourcing in order for the nervous system to return to homeostasis. And so when I've shared this presentation in the past, people often ask, what do you mean by these open information loops? How can that be distressing? And so the example I give these days is if we go back to March of 2020 and the pandemic just started emerging, and we didn't know what was going to happen next. And within the space of a week, many of us became epidemiologists in an almost overnight fashion, where we are trying to find as much information as possible to make the uncertainty and unpredictability feel a bit more certain. We're actually seeking to restore the nervous system back to a felt sense of safety through addressing the open information loop and the lack of information. Yeah. I'm going to pause there. Mm-hmm. You know, I noticed this come up for me in the last week. I'm in Anchorage at the moment, the traditional lands of the Denana Athabascan peoples. And in the late part of last week, there was a volcano in Russia that had erupted. And so all the volcanic ash was now causing for flights into and out of Anchorage to be cancelled. And so I'm in Seattle and I'm finding out this information. And a part of me is like, oh no, I need to be in Anchorage in 2 days' time. And so there was a part of me that was wanting to get as much information about that as possible so that I could make backup plans for my backup plans for my backup plans. Yeah. So that I could be prepared. Yes. And I know for myself that those open information loops, sometimes they can't be closed, right? And so they stay open, and that actually feeds into my anxiety. And so for me to notice and name that and to be able to resource myself in alternative ways allows me to be present to my life instead of pre-living, reliving, pre-feeling, refeeling, pre-doing and redoing my life and being absent from this present moment. Mm-hmm. And yet this is very real for many of us because there may not have been anyone there for us back then to help us to find the information that we needed. So we become self-reliant. Yeah. Remember, a strength becomes a weakness when it's taken too far. And so for many of us, the strategies that caused us to survive become the strategies that keep us from fully living. Yeah, both and. Now, if we hold that open information loop and we start to talk about the find response, what we have is a pleasurable, evolutionary, adaptive drive, right? Finding is motivated by dopamine, right? It's a drive. And so as an animal in nature, it feels so great to find mangoes. And it feels so great to figure out a new way to climb trees in order to pick mangoes. And it feels exceptional when we can figure out the other critters out there that eat mangoes that we can notice and track because they will take us to the mangoes. And so we get dopamine when we find, when we learn, and then that reinforces and gives pleasure to what we learned, the joy of finding, of learning. And yet, for those of us who work in addiction recovery, we're aware from learning about the neuroscience of addiction that dopamine is about more than pleasure. It's about survival. Finding is a survival response that allows us to explore, to play, to become curious, to try new things, to engage with uncertainty in ways that feel adaptive and enjoyable. And so when finding is ventrally mediated, and finding is wonderful. Yeah. And so for many of us, we know the joys, right, of finding, learning, creating, adapting. And yet, this enjoyable response goes haywire with stress. So here we have what causes stress. And so when there are perceived cues of stress that are ventrally mediated, the find response can help us to ask for information, to ask for clarity, to ask for support, to advocate, to find resources, to find the answer, to find a safe person, to find a knowledgeable, credible, reputable person or source of information. And this find response can also allow us to engage in creative, collaborative solutions. And yet, this adaptation, right, it's ventrally mediated, so we feel a little bit of stress. And so we go to this find response to bring the nervous system back into ventral, back inside the window, because this reinstates safety. It's the reinstatement of information, of clarity, of certainty and predictability, of voice and choice and agency. It's the reinstatement of relationality and connection and support. And so for those of us who have the ventral capacity, because there was someone there for us back then, we can sit with the activation of the nervous system when it arises, and we have the capacity for these adaptive responses to some stress in life. Wonderful. And yet, and we then have more capacity for creativity and to be able to sit with creative tension. Yeah, to be able to sit with creative tension. And so this is where conflict that a person is unable to handle, there's a fine line between between creative tension and conflict. Yeah. And for me, as a somatic therapist, it's about the bandwidth in someone's nervous system to be able to be with the sympathetic activation of stress. Yeah. And yet that capacity to be with stress, I have more capacity to be with creative tension in such a way that's collaborative and co-creative. Our relationship gets bigger and my bandwidth for life becomes more expansive. However, if the perceived cues of stress escalate, yeah, and it's conflict that a person is unable to handle, or if there's a lack of protective factors, or there's isolation from emotionally supportive relationships, or these cues of stress just become too much, then an individual may find themselves frantically engaging in finding as a way to prevent the situation from heading into further stress, distress, unsafety, and danger. And so this is where I want to name something that may be beneath the surface for some of us, which is that if any of these things happen to you prior to something really bad happening, then these can become trauma activation cues. They can become sympathetic nervous system activation cues. Yeah. So to be more specific and concrete, if in your history the lack of information was something that happened before there was silence and then abuse, then your nervous system is on the lookout for the thing before the thing before the thing, so that you can, it's that hypervigilant, hypersensitive, predictive, controlling superpower, so that you can then best prepare yourself. Yeah. If lack of transparency or trust, the silence, was the thing before someone would explode or leave, or there wouldn't be food for a week or two, we then become hypervigilant to these cues. Yeah. And so for some of us, and we may have noticed that in ourselves as well as in those around us, early days of the pandemic, right, that for some folks, this lack of information, transparency, trust, predictability, certainty, or agency happened for too long. And we started to go into a peri-trauma response. And then it was a little nudge, and then people were coming apart at the seams. Yeah. And so that's where the space for some compassionate acknowledgement that your nervous system is existing perfectly in service of survival by hyper-orienting you towards cues that in the past were the precursor to distress, unsafety, danger. Yeah. And so what happens when these perceived cues of stress are not ventrally mediated? We adapt. Trauma is adaptation. Our parts help us out. And so here we can look at all of this in terms of parts. An attachment cry part, a flight part, a fight part, a freeze part, and a submit, feign death part. And when the find part becomes activated and is not ventrally mediated, meaning the fight part is not resourced or supported, or the distress is happening for too long, then in order to prevent the nervous system from experiencing these extreme feelings that are outside of this window, the find part can then collude with some of the other parts as a way of preventing us from feeling feelings that we would do anything to not feel ever again. So let's unpack this. So when the attach cry part is in collaboration, right, has the find part running underneath it or parallel to it. Right, find plus attach says find a safe person. They might not actually be safe. They might be the nearest person. Yeah. And so some of us are looking for find the nearest safe person, someone, anyone to attach to. Or perhaps we go find and then fawn. I give up my authenticity in order to belong so that you won't leave me or abandon me. For some of us, it's find fake. Yeah. That imposter syndrome. I experienced that spike. The find part comes online and the attach cry part says, I'll be whoever you need me to be in this moment, whatever the situation calls me to need to be. The find part can perhaps collude or collaborate with the flight part, find an excuse, find an exit strategy, find an escape plan, find the nearest bar in my mind, or fill in your drug or behavior or substance of choice. Find a way to deflect or avoid or minimize or deny or pretend. Yeah, dissociate. The find part, when in collaboration with the fight part, says find a weapon, find an offensive strategy, find a devaluation strategy where I devalue the other person or devalue myself, that harsh inner critic. Find a way to dominate or conquer or control. These other strategies that we have that the find part says, I don't want to go into full-on fight mode, but the fight part is here just in case, and I'm trying my best, to be adaptive with this fight part. And yet the fight part is there just in case, but I don't want it to be there just in case, and I'm glad that it is. Find and freeze, high freeze. It's find the answer. I will do anything to not experience the terror, the frozen terror. And so my find part goes into hyperdrive to find the answer. And yet there's this analysis paralysis, intellectually, or perhaps it's physically in my body. I want to, but I can't. And I'm trying my best to actually go through my possible escape routes or fight routes that can get me out of this moment, as well as possible attach routes to get me out of this moment. So my mind is doing this, and yet I'm frozen. Yeah. And then the submit, feign death part, a little bit of that spike of sympathetic activation, find, and then I immediately default to there's no one there for me. And so I go into feign death, withdraw, become invisible. Pause for breath. Some of us may recognize that this may happen sequentially. For others of us, we may recognize that this is like having an army of protectors where everyone is online and we're trying to figure out rapidly which solution to go to next. And for many of us, there's a truncated attachment cry. So back then, there was no one there for us. And so we learned, or rather we overlearned, to not ask for help. And it's this part that is what I'd like to leave with you as a takeaway for today. That there may have been no one there for us, so we overlearned that it's not okay to ask for help. And so this alerting response can activate a functional freeze. Yeah. It's a survival adaptation to protect us from going outside of the window. We don't want to experience panic, rage, terror, or despair, defeat, and shame ever again. There was no one there for us back then. So this find response goes into hyperdrive in order to protect us from feeling these feelings ever again. And then because we overlearned that there was no one there, we then become incredibly self-reliant and independent, creative and resourceful. I believe that's why we love shows like MacGyver and Doogie Howser MD, and I'm showing my age now because they are shows from like 20 or 30 years ago, and I'd love for you all to put into the chat box, whether you're on YouTube or Zoom, the shows that have these amazing individuals who are able to, be independent and self-reliant and adaptively find solutions without needing anyone there for them ever, such as the Survivor shows. Such as our love affair with the Alaska shows of people who are able to make it out in the wilderness. It becomes part of our cultural iconography in terms of what we valorize. And yet every strength taken to an extreme becomes a weakness. Some pause. And so it can be the work of a lifetime to entertain the idea of the possibility of acknowledging our own internal distress, and to entertain the idea of the possibility of asking for support, for help from others. And so to round out today, I just want to offer, I'm going to stop the screen share. I'm just going to offer a gesture of self contact. And I invite you to play with a gesture of self-contact. And to perhaps lean towards and then lean away from. So if your hands are on the front side of your body, perhaps lean towards and then lean away. You have choice. You can lean towards and you can also lean away. And you're in charge. Perhaps your self-contact is side to side, arms. So perhaps rocking from side to side. In that case, you can lean towards and lean away. And perhaps the self-contact is hands on your legs. You lean towards and lean away. I'm becoming inspired here watching you, Pat. You seem to allow your body to land in the self-contact in a way that is inspiring to me.
Well, thank you. I didn't think I was doing it very well, but happy to hear that.
Yeah. And then to round today, I want to acknowledge that you have found us here at TRF, that this adaptive find response has gotten you finding the answers for yourself through psychoeducation, through Bessel's book, The Body Keeps the Score, through Leisha Sky's work, through all the presenters that we've had over the years on TRF Tuesdays, as well as the other conferences that the Trauma Research Foundation hosts. And so this is adaptive. Yeah. It's not a pathology. Yeah. And yet I have a quote that I'd like to end with by Rainer Maria Rilke. And I'll read it. I beg you to have patience with everything unresolved in your heart and to try to love the questions themselves as if they were locked rooms or books written in a foreign language. Don't search for the answers which could not be given to you now because you would not be able to live them. The point is to live everything. Live the questions now, because perhaps then, someday far in the future, you will gradually, without even noticing it, live your way into the answer. Trauma recovery is entering into the dignity of risking living, risking trusting, risking receiving. In baby steps. In baby steps.
I do want to give everybody an opportunity to, if they have a quick question, drop in the chat there. We don't have too much time. We're a little bit over, but there might be a few things people are wondering. In the meantime, I have a quick question. I was wondering, so when you were talking about the part that piqued my interest the most, when we were talking about the monkey and the mangoes and finding those things, I was wondering if there's maybe some other evolutionary thing that's like not obvious that would be, an interesting takeaway. Doesn't have to be dopamine related, but sort of, how those chemicals work.
Oh, you've got me stumped, Pat. Let's see here. Perhaps not dopamine related.
It doesn't have to be. I mean, it could be.
Yes, yes, yes. You know, part of pleasure is endorphins. Yeah. And so this is where we get dopamine that helps us to remember something pleasurable that gets encoded in our memory bank, says, I've got to remember this. This feels great to remember. And yet endorphins also help us to feel that sense of pleasure as it lands. And yet what can be so confusing for us as trauma survivors is that endorphins are also released when there's a lot of pain. And so our pain and our pleasure networks become wired differently, where things that other people find pleasurable, we're like, and we also then gravitate towards pain because for whatever reason, pain feels pleasurable for us.
That's a really interesting answer. Thank you. One of the questions that came in here is, how often are you able in the moment to recognize and reflect on the choices you're about to make? And does that come with practice that you're able to sort of regulate that more? Any advice?
It does. It comes with practice. You know, part of my response to life is being in the front half of my body. So as soon as that find response activates my sympathetic nervous system, I move towards fight or flight. So if I show you that from side on, I start doing this. Yeah. And so I'm not even sitting vertically, I'm sitting in my front body. And I actually did this for most of my life without being aware of it. But now I have access to more of a neutral spine because of yoga. Yeah, and learning that. And so now I notice when I'm here in the front body, and then I resource myself by rocking back and forth and side to side. And that gives me a little bit more capacity for curiosity and to perhaps name what just happened. Yeah. And am I starting to head towards a sympathetic overdrive? And how can I resource my find part, my flight part, my fight part, as well as honor them in the moment, because they're giving messages to my nervous system. And it took a lot, because prior to that, I would be in freeze, right? And so to actually go, okay, I can actually move out of freeze and play with this was enough at the start.
Thank you. I think we are a little bit over now, and I'm sorry to everybody who submitted a question and we don't get an opportunity to answer them, but we can keep track of it and hopefully get to them next week.
Thanks, everyone. Linda, thanks so much for being here today. We really look forward to next week, which is the fourth and final session. Thank you to our audience. We're so happy to have you here. You'll find past sessions of TRF Tuesday under the resources tab on our website. Behind the scenes are team members Pat Murray, Connor McCann, and a new occasional TRF Tuesday host, Star Muhammad. I'm Mary Frangie, and we look forward to seeing you all next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.